You let us know if you need anything, as you're the committee's patient. We mean that in a good way.
Well, thanks. All should be well.
Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'll be absent next Tuesday morning.
Okay.
That's
I have a doctor's
that's gonna be a problem. So I retract what we were saying.
We are live.
Okay, thank you.
And
Okay.
so
And Richie's out. next
before
week.
you do that,
Yeah.
tomorrow I will be remote.
Okay.
Thank you.
Senator Bray, just for clarification on that, if we are remote, we can still vote.
Good question. I think I'd want to check with the Senate secretary.
Okay, because
if
I
I don't know if that privilege still exists for remote connecting.
for committees.
So let me write that down.
So if not, and we're gonna vote on something, I will make sure that I'm here for the morning, but if not, it would be much better if I could go
I think
home.
until the 18th, the Senator Sue isn't here,
Right, everybody's voting out bills now, right? Yeah,
but good to check.
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's a good point.
Check with Secretary Whitmer. Okay, so good morning. This is part 2 of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. Today is Thursday, March 10th. And we are continuing our work going on to S-281, an act related to hunting coyotes with dogs. We have in front of us a new draft, draft 3.2 dated 3/9/22, timestamp 2:54 p.m. This draft is the product of me sharing Commissioner Herrick's draft language, as well as sharing feedback that I have gathered from our committee discussions to come up with something that is obviously an intermediate version. It's not what we started with, and it's not precisely what the commissioner started with. And I think in order, we don't have Mr. O'Grady available to us. So I just want to make sure everyone has a copy. And I was going to do just a quick walkthrough since Mr. O'Grady's not here. So section 1, page 1, hunting coyotes with aid of dogs permit. No person shall pursue coyote with the aid of dogs, either for training or taking purposes, without a permit issued by the commissioner. The commissioner may deny any permit at the commissioner's discretion, and the commissioner shall not issue more than 100 permits annually. The number of permits that the commissioner issues to non-residents in any given year shall not exceed 10% of the number of permits issued to residents in the preceding year. And the commissioner shall establish a process and standards for determining which non-residents are to receive a permit, including who will receive a permit if there are more non-resident applicants and non-resident permits. 3, a non-resident may train dogs to pursue coyote only while the training season is in effect in the non-resident home state, subject to the requirements of this part and rules adopted under this part. Fees. So B1, the commissioner shall issue permits under this section to a resident for a fee of $50. And let me just check in with the commissioner. Is that the same fee as for bear hound? Is that correct?
I believe it is.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
And sub 2, the application for a non-resident permit issued shall be 10, and the fee for a non-resident permit issued under the section shall be $200 for a successful applicant. That takes us to section 5009, pursuing coyote with aid of dogs without landowner permission. So A person shall not release a dog onto land for the purposes of pursuing coyote with the aid of dogs if the landowner or the landowner's agent previously personally communicated to the dog owner or dog handler that pursuing coyote with the aid of dogs is prohibited on the land. I have a question on my copy related to that, but I'll just continue.
Unlisted numbers.
In B, a person shall not release a dog on the land posted in accordance with section 5201 of this title for the purpose of pursuing coyote with the aid of dogs, unless the dog owner or handler of the hunting dog has obtained a courtesy permission card from the landowner or landowner's agent following the pursuit, allowing the pursuit of coyote with the aid of dogs on the land. The question I have there is that we have this courtesy permission card construct, and in speaking with Mr. O'Grady, I had anticipated actually that the courtesy card would apply to both unposted and posted land. But obviously, I mean, the important thing was to get the courtesy card construct into the draft, and we can discuss how it works, doesn't work, or the scope of its use. C, a person shall not release onto land a dog for the purpose of pursuing a coyote-related dog if in the previous 365 days a dog was previously found on the land and the dog owner, handler, or a person participating in the hunt has been personally informed by law enforcement that hunting dogs are not permitted on the property. D, penalties. For a first offense, a person who violates this section shall have committed a minor Fish and Wildlife violation and be assessed a 5-point violation under 4502B1, which I think 5 points is actually the default penalty. And 2, for a second or subsequent violation, the person shall be assessed a 10-point violation under 4502B2 and shall be fined under section 4515, which I think is the blanking on the cross-reference there. It's the judging panel that addresses addresses penalties. Section 2, moratorium on hunting coyote with the aid of dogs. So a person shall not pursue a coyote with the aid of dogs, either for training or taking, except that a person may pursue a coyote with the aid of dogs in defense of a person or property if the person pursuing with the dogs is, in the first case, the landowner, him or herself, or secondly, has obtained a courtesy permission card from the landowner or landowner's agent prior to release the dog. B, this section shall be repealed. So the moratorium is repealed when the Fish and Wildlife boards are effective. So they would have gone through the board process, through LCAR, and has been approved. Section 3, Fish and Wildlife Board rules pursuing coyote with aid of dogs. So this is a general rulemaking on coyote hunting. General Assembly see the rules provided under the subsection. So this is a statement of intent. The General Assembly, through the rules required under this section, intends to reduce conflicts between landowners and persons pursuing coyote with the aid of dogs by reducing the frequency that dogs or persons pursuing coyote enter onto land that is posted against hunting or land where pursuit of coyotes with dogs is not authorized. And then we get into provisions for how features to be considered during the rulemaking. Fish and Wildlife Board shall adopt rules regarding the pursuit, and the rule shall include at least the following provisions. 1, so we're not specifying, but laying out the topics to be addressed. Number 1, a limit on the number of dogs that may be used to pursue coyote. 2, a prohibition on the substitution of any new dog for another dog during the pursuit, also known as relay. 3, the legal means of take. 4, a definition of what constitutes control of dogs that shall not allow the use of radio collars, telemetry collars, GPS collars, or similar collars to constitute control, but shall allow a person to use such collars for purposes other than control.
So you can't use these in lieu of control.
Right.
Does control get defined?
I have to, this is a perfect time to have Mr. O'Grady here, and we don't.
Okay, yeah.
But I know in the bear hound rule, control is defined. And I don't know if that definition carries over here or not, but you're absolutely right. We have to, it better be clearly defined. So the point was just to clear up confusion that came up in prior meetings. You can use the collars, they're useful for managing dogs and hounds. And we don't want to diminish the utility of having them, but also to state clearly that just wearing such a collar, no definition of control can be written that can be satisfied by the wearing of collar alone. And then 5, required reporting of every coyote killed. And then C, the board shall also consider whether or not there should be provisions related to seasonal restrictions and dates. It's to effective dates. So the moratorium and the rulemaking are effective on passage. And then section 1, the prohibition takes place once the final rules, in sub B, the prohibition doesn't take effect until final rules are written. So that is a draft that tries to starts with the commissioner's version, add some provisions that I think we talked about as a committee to shift the balance a little bit. We talked about permission as a troublesome thing in the past, and Senator Westman offered the, I think, very helpful suggestion of rather than create a whole new system that could burden wardens, like we said, written permission of a warden, that we use the existing courtesy card programs as the form's already online.
It's interesting.
And there's plenty of people who
Really
actually
good idea.
use it and understand it already, so we wouldn't start from scratch.
Yeah.
So Senator Westman.
I have to admit, because I don't do any of this, I don't understand the collars and what, other than tracking the dog, what do they do with the collars?
There are different types, but so often they give you the hound's position, direction of travel, and speed, and then some of them, not all of them, can also deliver a tone or a shock. And so usually if a hound is doing something you don't want it to, and you've been training it, often just sounding a tone tells it to like, wait, think for a moment, should you be chasing whatever you're chasing?
So
A tone can turn them back. A shock can also do the same thing. Try to get the hound to consider laying off of game or prey that it shouldn't be on, for instance.
So that is vaguely, that's the way it had been explained to me. You did a better job than the people talking at me, got me to understand them. If dogs were doing something in an aggressive manner that the owner wasn't right there, and they could either give them a tone or give them a shot to pull them off, that is exercising some control, but I'm not sure that that's a bad thing.
Right. No, I think that I agree. And so the point, I think, is that having a collar alone constitutes a satisfactory definition of having a dog under control, for instance, the bear hound rules. And so, yes, if you knew what your hound was doing, and I'm not sure that a hound who is actively doing it's too specific for me to generalize. It's more of a suggestion to a dog usually than a absolute control kind of thing. But yeah, so it would be that could constitute the sole criterion on which whether you met the control requirement or not. Okay. But yeah, so they definitely have an influence over dogs. And then the other obvious thing that makes it really problematic as the sole definition of control is that they are so often out of sight. So you're not able to observe what they're doing at that moment. So I guess if there are the committee, do you have questions about this draft? I know it's there'll be, some could be questions that we need Mr. O'Grady for,
The
but
control question that Senator McDonald had, I thought was a good one.
Mhm.
And what is that?
I wasn't. This bill, this draft suggests a lot of things that we believe ought to be resolved, and if there were protocols on how you did this, accepted behaviors and practices, we would want to have a bill that makes those protocols, lawful, and then if they're not followed, a penalty system to encourage people to follow them, et cetera, et cetera. If we're gonna do this chapter and verse stuff, then we gotta meet a higher standard than this does. Or do we delegate to the board and the department? Open question. That they come up with the protocols that ought to be, that are reasonable, and suggestions on how to deal with them, to put into statute after those folks have considered them and made a recommendation. And I mention that because then it's the board and the department that are crafting them. And if they don't craft it, if they blow it off, then that's on them. If we craft it, then the board and the department can sit back and say, oh, watch us become the targets of, and nitpicking is not the devil being in the details. I think we should craft the protocols that we would seek to be created, and ask them to provide the details and the time periods, etc. And then the next committee, the next Natural Resources Committee, would look at those recommendations and act upon them, or make them stricter or looser, or would nitpick their details. And they have more experience in this stuff than we do. If they presented us with a comprehensive package, we could then critique it. And so I don't.
so I would say, so thank you.
And I look at the letter that Senator Campion has drafted,
Yeah,
which seeks to give and encourage the board to do things slightly broader than they are perceived as doing today.
okay. So the construct here, I mean, it's not that obvious reading through it like that, especially because I was reading pretty fast, is,
Oh, no, it's just all the things in there are
Yeah.
things that would show, you would wish were protocols of behaviors.
Right.
And if they were to, when we start to put numbers of days and numbers of dogs, there's some parts in here where you ask them to suggest the number of dogs, and to suggest this, to suggest that. That's the most constructive part of the bill, as opposed to putting targets up there to be fought over.
right.
Let those be fought over by the.
Okay. So I think I'm missing something a little bit, because we did have a very prescriptive version of this rulemaking back in an earlier draft. And then after talking as a committee and with the commissioner, agreed to step away and say, okay, on these provisions, we will allow rulemaking to, we're laying out topics to be considered, I think the majority of which were in the commissioner's own proposal to us. So I'm just sensing that it feels a little bit like to me like you you're worried, concerned that we may be stepping on toes a little bit or prescriptive. And I think our goal was to set up a process that let the board address the specifics. All we're doing is setting in motion the process.
Yeah. And when this draft says suggest the number of dogs, suggest the number, how points might be done, suggest how remedies for when you speak to the landowner and things don't work out or there are alleged offenses, have them suggest how those would be resolved in statute or rules rather than us as their person. So I think this is heads in the right direction.
Okay.
Cautious. I think we expect the board to be and the department working together to be more, to take this on and put their best efforts into coming up with a solution that affects the people hunt and the people whose lands and communities are affected by the hunts.
Right.
Rather than, or we could just, they can't come up with it, maybe we'll be back to banning the whole thing. Can't imagine that would happen.
Right, well, until the rules are approved, there is a moratorium in effect other than as provided for earlier in the bill. So, in defense of a personal property. And so I think that will,
So in the meantime,
so.
what we prescribing shall not happen.
Right, so I think for all interested parties, I think there's, I would think, good motivation to complete a timely rulemaking and address the criteria that are listed. And that's part of why there's an intent statement in the lead-in language to the beginning at the bottom of page 3, lines 20, 21, and then into the first 3 lines of page 4. Because otherwise, as an LCAR member, I could imagine it's theoretically possible. I'm not saying it's likely to happen, but it's within the realm of possibility. A rulemaking could occur. They could address every criterion listed, and the decision would mean to say something that would never happen. There's no limit whatsoever on the number of dogs. And so LCAR would not be in a position to object to that because they would have considered it. So that's why there's some expression up front about reducing the frequency that dogs and persons pursuing interactive land that is posted against hunting or land for pursuit is not authorized. That private property rights issue that we've been running into. So with that, I'd like to, Senator McCormick.
Thanks. On page 2, starting at line 8, those sections A, B, and C. The landowner needs to opt in or the landowner needs to opt out. I'm not sure what the aggregate, I'm not sure if they contradict one another. They seem to be all addressing more or less the same thing.
Right. So the difference between A and B is A is land and B is posting land. And I actually, during the editing process, I think I didn't make that clear to Mr. O'Grady. So my proposal to the committee would be to consider that in both A and B, in order to address this issue of permission and not making it the landowner's task to go find the hunter and say you're not allowed here, but to use the existing courtesy card system and ask the person who's hunting to get the card signed by the landowner where she or he is going to hunt.
So the landowner should not, in my view, the landowner should not have to assert property right. The property right should be the default. That's the assumption. And so that basically you can't unless the landowner says you can.
Well, so there's a needle to be threaded, right? Because you have the constitutional opportunity to hunt. And so because of that, you have to post to exclude people, right? That's or keeping people off. So this addresses that. It still lets people on, but because it's been an area of conflict, it says to use the permission card. And, you know, we should hear more from Mr. O'Grady around that, but
It's sort of an interim until there's a more permanent rule system
Right.
established.
You know, just from my experience in a practical experience, the best hunters bring this card around. They usually fill it out. I sign the card and say yes. And then when the game warden says, hey, what are you doing here? They quite frequently fill out their card and say, well, we got permission to hunt it.
This is it.
Those are the best
There you go.
hunters.
There's a copy of it.
And consider what that. I don't want to have landowners say, well, this is complicated. I might as well, if I just post my land, I don't have to worry about any of this because we're not trying to encourage land to be posted as the only way to keep dogs from running on your property. That if there's another way to do it, the dog handlers, the dogs have to meet certain criteria regardless of whether the land is posted or not. We don't incent people to post because that's the only way to deal with it. Because that
Right.
doesn't help
And
us. And it doesn't help the hunting community.
you know, we've got a portion of our land posted and on the majority of it not. But I always feel better about the people that come and hunt that have brought this sheet to us, and the bottom half I get, and I can keep track of who's asked and who hasn't.
I don't post my land, but I'm always surprised and grateful of the number of people that do the courtesy to stop by and
Yep.
and say, you know, and even ask where would you not like us to go, or is there anything we
Yeah.
don't know? Which is landowners and hunters working together as opposed to posting, which is, you know, black and white,
Right.
you know, one or the other.
Well, and we had that bill with the purple,
yes.
which quite frankly, I have some sympathy for all of that. And it's just the idea of paint on the trees. What if the land and all of that? But it's, I don't want to encourage people to have to post to, I agree with you.
Well, now, can a landowner post just no hounding?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can.
Well, I
But
think,
it doesn't.
No hounding.
I don't know about.
It's not saying, I mean,
Commissioner, the versions I've seen are no hunting, no fishing, no trapping, or some combination of any of those three. And then you can have hunting by permission only.
yeah.
And so those are the varieties that we currently have.
Okay, I'm thinking when you mentioned the constitutional issue, the Vermont Constitution guarantees the right to hunt.
Yeah.
But we don't violate that right when we say you can't hunt out of season.
Right.
When there's all sorts of hunting practices that are illegal.
Right, like no snares.
Yeah, so what is the constitutional problem with assuming that
I
there is
don't
to be no dogs on anyone's land unless the owner explicitly gives permission?
So, you know, it'd be helpful to have Mr. O'Grady for this. I don't know that there really is. I just wanted
Yeah.
to be careful because we don't want to drive people to post. And that, because the number of hounding days might be very small and people may well have, on our farm, we never posted because people always hunted respectfully while they're there. So I think a lot of people are in that boat. They would like to share their land. They don't want to be subject to having hounds come through, unauthorized. So that's the point of, using the courtesy card. It seems like the lightest touch. It doesn't add a paperwork burden to the department. They already have the systems. It also creates a written record so that as people say, the game warden will have to establish the facts of the case, it's called out. I think it creates a clearer record of whether someone has or has not complied. So that's the thinking behind it.
Yeah. In a perfect world of my own making would be fairly simple. We would just say no hounding unless you have permission. I'd like to explore whether that's, I bet that's constitutional, but I'm not a constitutional scholar. I just play one on television.
Well, we should, you may
You're
want
the star of your own show.
I'm definitely the star. My wife catches me making speeches to myself. Yeah, so this addresses the landowners issue. It doesn't, well, are we throwing in, is he proposing we just throw in the towel on the cruelty issue?
well, I don't know that I'd call it throwing in the towel, but it sends it to rulemaking, and, that right now, there was an earlier version, as I was saying, was more prescriptive about the outcomes of what the rule must contain, some particular provisions, like it explicitly named the maximum number of dogs. In consultation with the commissioner, who's shown a real interest in working with the committee on finding a way forward, we sort of stepped out of being prescriptive rulemaking invokers and laid out the criteria to be covered, and without carte blanche. That's why the intent statement leads into the rule. I don't know if we've got to a place of balance, and we haven't heard from the commissioner yet. So if there's not more committee discussion prior to hearing from the commissioner, I propose we go to the commission.
Okay.
Senator McDonald.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody would bet against someone introducing a bill next year to ban coyote hunting with dogs. That's gonna be sent to this committee next year, no matter what we do.
Yep.
And no matter what the Fish and Wildlife Board and the commissioner recommend, that bill's gonna come in here.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah.
I would hope it comes in here and ends up blowing up on the wall, because the Fish and Wildlife Board and the commissioner have made some recommendations that we could all agree on. And we don't need to pass a bill like that, but we cannot continue to do what has been going on in the last decade or so.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I'm sure this is not the last Fish and Wildlife hunting bill that this committee will ever see. So, Mr.
You
Commissioner.
sure of that?
Pretty sure. Mr. Commissioner, thank you. So you've seen the bill, and I
Yep.
don't know if you've had enough time to
Well,
consult with your staff yet, or if you have some initial thoughts for the board.
I have taken a couple swipes through it.
Okay.
And I would like to reinforce some of the commentary by Senator McDonald by way of an analogy. Back in my days at emergency management and public safety, we had oftentimes the need to request resources from the Vermont National Guard, whether it was for flooding or other events. And one of the things that we learned very early on was, tell us what you want, don't tell us how to do it. So for instance, if you need to evacuate an area, don't say you need this particular helicopter, because we have other resources. My point being, I did respond to the first draft by saying it was too prescriptive. And rather than laying out the intent, it also said how to get there. And I think this bill is very close with the one exception, and that has to do with the radio collars. They are in fact a way for hounders to control the dog, whether it's the tone or the mild electric shock. And I actually would even offer that one, you let us figure that part out. I would strike that language right as it is, but we also might consider requiring the use of these collars as a method to go forward. So I will say this as well. There will be action on this, and I'll say it'll be action regardless of whether you pass a bill instructing the department to do this. This is clearly a problem and it needs to be addressed and cleaned up. And we're committed to doing that. It's also, as you're recognizing, it's fairly complex and complicated. And so I think that the language, if we strike out the collar, the definition of control, it gives us the direction that you're looking for. It doesn't also, it's also not we're not limited by that. Those rules can go beyond even what's in there. But if there's too much there, I think you may be creating problems that go beyond this particular issue.
Well, thank you. So, yeah, I think I'd like to better understand what you're saying, because I think from, the way I would phrase it, not in the way it's here in the bill, but just talking to someone about it, I'd say, we know there's a valuable role of collars, and they provide they provide information for sure, and they provide some level of control or influence. But obviously not adequate control, because we have hounds running on the property where they're not supposed to be. We've had hound hiker conflicts or hound animal conflicts. So there should be some other way of requiring someone hunting with hounds to manage those hounds.
So what I'll say is a lot of the, so when I hunt, I always bring a good old fashioned compass, because electronics sometimes fail, especially when it's cold. But I also have on my phone an app, and on that app, it tracks where I'm walking, and it also tracks, I can see the property boundaries. They are overlaid on that system. And so I know whose property I may be going on or been asked to stay off. And so that is, I mean, it seems to me the majority of the issue here is property and property rights, and the dogs going on places, and people saying ridiculous things like my dog can't read. I get that. This use of collars, GPS, and the ability to call them back is going to be more facilitated by the use of collars than not being able to use them for that purpose.
Sure, and I think I'm completely agreeing with you. I'm just saying that to have a definition of control that relies exclusively on wearing a collar hasn't led to, it's allowed for some bad outcomes in the past. And so I think we've struggled with bear hunting discussions, and again here, what other ways, and so we don't know the answer. And to sort of Senator McDonald's point, the reason we're requesting a rulemaking is to turn it over to the department and others with far more experience to suggest means of accomplishing those kinds of outcomes, better control. So I think what I would propose is that we, how about this? Can you address how you would, control obviously needs to be part of the recipe for, otherwise, the alternative is out of control. So control, I think, is a reasonable expectation all the way around. How do we express that? And
So
if you,
I guess I would say, we got this language last night at 10, I got it at 10 o'clock. I go to bed at 9:30, so I was a little behind. But when, in terms of trying to solve, you're asking to solve this specific problem right now, rather than just turfing it to the rulemaking. And so what I'm suggesting is strike that language and ask us to develop a means of control in the rulemaking.
okay, well, so I'll work on behalf of the committee with Mr. O'Grady and my colleagues here to think about how we could rephrase. But I think in the end, the bridge too far, as I've understood it from past work, is that no definition of control that relies merely on wearing a collar is satisfactory to meet some sort of means of control definition. And I think that's,
Well, control should rest with the hunter.
Right.
And the collars are a tool within that, can be a tool within that overall hunter's control. So the question is, in a regulatory process, how do we get there? And how are we, I know we're having this discussion here, but how, without mentioning it in this bill, how do we get, are we assured that that is going to be part of the overall regulatory process that comes down? Naturally, people at this table feel some need to at least mention it to make sure it gets developed in the regulatory process. I personally totally get, I don't want to be prescriptive about it, to not give you freedom to that. But I think at this table, we want the issue looked at, and we want to make sure that it's part of the list of things that we say needs to be dealt with.
right.
And the list rather than the prescription.
Yeah.
And
So
I think Senator Westman, you just said it, that it would just be included that the department would work on developing ways to define control of the dogs, the hounds, but not say what it can't include.
Well, and again, I'm gonna keep coming back to this. I'm not saying it can't include, it can't exclusively rely on.
I think that's
That's
gonna be our message.
all I'm trying to communicate. I don't know if it's confusing the way I say it or not, but.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I think there are instances when that is sufficient.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And another, I mean, it's a little different. Well, I'm not even going to go there. I think
Yeah.
I've made my point.
Sure. So I would ask you to mull it over and see if you might be able to send language that would allow you to feel like the bill was supportable around this issue, and you'll do the same. And I'll try to have something to you later this afternoon, so that, and if you could do the same on our side, then maybe tomorrow we can have a meeting of the minds and move an agreeable bill forward. That would be my hope and goal. Senator Campion.
So I'm sorry if I missed it. So is it the committee's consensus to do the control conversation in rulemaking?
Right.
It is. That's a yes.
Yes. So,
Thank you. That helps. That's good. Great. Okay. Thank you.
It says that one of the things that the rulemaking shall do is provide a definition of what constitutes
Yeah.
control of dogs.
Yeah. Thank you.
Then goes on to say
Thank you.
that definition can't rely exclusively on being collared. Okay.
Senator McCormick has a question.
Yeah, I think, I presume that the committee agrees that the collars do not control. What the collar does is it informs the hunter of where his out of control dogs are.
Thank you.
It locates the out of control dog, but there's no control from the collar. Perhaps some influence. I think the term used was suggestion.
I would,
count that as
I would
control.
not agree with that characterization. That is control. I have been hunting over a dog with birds, and the person working the dog, if the dog goes out, it comes right back. It is under their control. So
Yeah.
it's more than just a suggestion.
Yeah, I'm being polite, I suppose, when I say suggestion. And it also depends, as all this does, on the level of training of that hound and the person handling the hound. When it's really well-trained, well-paired team that's experienced with each other, a tone alone can be enough to, sort of snap a hound out of doing something and have it circle back.
And how does the hunter know when to use that tone if the dogs are miles away?
Well, there's that whole piece too, like, it's like it's information once they're out of eyesight.
In bird hunting, you're sort of in the same general location as the
So
dog.
what's your plan, Mr. Chair? I mean, this is a milestone agreement.
Right.
When the commissioner says, this is a problem that must be addressed and cleaned up. And if we all have acknowledged that, I'm people, hunters I've spoken to on the phone and some that have testified, this is a big deal. And now we're at the position of saying, how is the best way to craft the changes that we agree need to be made? And that's it. It's the first time we've been talking together as citizens, promoters on both sides of the issue. And I don't know, I'm gonna sleep better tonight and maybe have different questions we can ask ourselves in the morning. But
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, I'll echo what Sarah McDonald just said. I really appreciate that the commissioner and others have worked with us all week and beyond just this week to think again about all the different perspectives that feed into this really complicated set of practices. So again, sort of logistically, so Mr. Commissioner, if you can work on some control related language on your side, I'll do the same with Ledge Council on our side. Let's share drafts later today, and maybe we can even have a conversation, but we'll see if we can knit it all together tomorrow. So that would be great. Okay, so thank you again for coming in. Really appreciate your open-minded, hard work on all this.
Well, I appreciate the committee's time and effort.
Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Yeah, having served on LCAR, I have some familiarity with the relationship between legislation and rulemaking. And I think it's incumbent upon us not just to hand the question off to rulemaking, but to be very clear on what the rules have to accomplish. The way I used to teach this was that basically the administrator is authorized by the legislation, may not go beyond the legislation, but also may not fall short of it. That you have to do the rules to make happen what the law says has to happen. And so I do want to be, I like that the collar alone does not satisfy the control requirement, but my sense would be that the collar really isn't. The idea that it's control, that you're controlling dogs from miles away because you can make them stop what they're doing, or you have no way of knowing what they're doing, I think is not really control. So I think I want to see something other than just.
Sure. Okay, so we'll work on it. Pleased to see us making progress and want to thank the committee, everyone listening. We've all heard, we've received many emails and phone calls. I know it's difficult for people who are not in the room participating firsthand to observe a process that they have strong feelings about. But I think we have people on all sides coming at it with a very genuine desire to come up with, to craft a balanced path forward that really changes the nature of the use of towns in Coyote. So with that, we will pause on this part. We're going to change bills and move to another bill to complete our work for the morning. Everyone should have a copy of S284. Let me just double check, and that is, so thank you, Commissioner. S284 is an act relating to weatherization. And so we're bearing down on is the money. We've been talking about it in the last several weeks.
Are we on draft 1.1?
Yeah, I've got a lot.
That's the one just handed out to us.
I just gave it to you.
Yeah. Right, so it's just a 4-pager. It's dated 3/9/22, 7:22 p.m.
Yes.
Freshly produced last evening. So just to recap for folks, we have council with us to do a walkthrough. And then the overall framework has been, we have a $20 million recommend from the governor. Overall, we've been trying to make sure that we understand what activities will and will not be covered by the 20. And then we've also invited in requests when we said, particularly we want to be able to do better on workforce. What are some of the proposals there? And one of our partners all along on last year's work and this year's work has been Neil Wonderville, who's been leading an outside group sponsored by Energy Action Network. And then one of the largest recipients of funds has been Efficiency Vermont. So I've asked both Mr. Wonderville and Mr. Riley to join us this morning. But I'd like to start first with asking Ms. Schakowsky to walk us through draft 1.1, please. Good morning.
Good morning. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So draft 1.1 is posted, and I think you have it in front of you. This is the strike all amendment to S284. You will recall that it was your committee amendment, your committee bill. The underlying bill had a study committee in it related to weatherization, so that has been removed. Section 1 is the same as it was in the underlying bill. And it's also language that you passed last session that did not make it to the finish line. So section 1 amends 10 VSA 581, the building energy efficiency goals. So it shall be the goal of the state to improve sustainability, to improve substantially the energy fitness of at least 120,000 housing units and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 0.15 million metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent by 2031.
Thank you.
So that hasn't changed in a while. There's new language on page 2. So on page 2 in section 2, 30 VSA 2502 is amended. So this is the section on the home weatherization assistance program. I believe this was a recommendation that you received from Sarah Phillips. So the director shall supplement or supplant any federal program with the state home weatherization assistance program. The state program shall provide an enhanced weatherization assistance amount exceeding the federal per unit limit, allowing amounts up to an average of $8,500 per unit allocated on a cost-effective basis. The allowable average per unit may be adjusted to account for the lower cost per unit of multifamily buildings. In units where costs exceed the allowable average by more than 25%, prior approval of the director of the State Economic Opportunity Office shall be required before work commences. This amount shall be adjusted annually to account for increased material and labor costs due to inflation. So that's a change instead of using the increasing consumer price index. And so finally in this bill is section 3 is an appropriation section for weatherization investments. So I was not in your committee yesterday to hear any of the discussion. I hope that this is I hope these are the appropriations you were looking for. So in fiscal year 2023, $21,433,000 is appropriated from the general fund as follows. And so my first question for you to consider is are these general fund dollars? I think so, but I'm not sure. And then on to page 3 is where the breakout of this is. So $20 million to the Department of Children and Families Office of Economic Opportunity Home Weatherization Assistance Program. Up to $150,000 of these funds may be used for vermiculite remediation and home repair as part of home weatherization. That second sentence about vermiculite remediation, I copied that from the appropriation that you gave to OEO last year. I don't know if you want to include that again, but I did copy this from last year's appropriation to them.
Thank you.
Next, $500,000 to the Department of Labor to provide training subsidies. These subsidies shall be provided to contractors and businesses to fund internships for lightly skilled workers, subsidize wages for new hires and interns, provide scholarships for further training, and cover additional costs for students during internships. So I made up that language, and I don't, again, know what your intent is.
Well, thank you. So the chart we circulated, I think that was the, and then we took testimony. So we will revisit, well, two things. We had a pretty informal discussion about which of the different proposals we saw to include for the sake of having a next draft. I used the ones that I think there was shared interest in. I'm not supposing that we're done yet, but it gives us something to edit as a group. Thank you.
Next, $333,000 to the Vermont Technical College for training and career path programs. These programs shall include programs to provide training for contractors, electricians, plumbers, and to train building science mentors, programs for career pathway training for students in grades 5 through 12, and programs to provide teacher training in green careers.
Great, thank you.
And finally, $600,000 to Vermont Technical College for mobile workforce training labs. These labs shall be used to reach geographically hard to reach locations and demographics.
Okay, so I'll refer committee members just to remind you, everyone has this chart that we went through. We have the testimony. I pulled all the different things we heard into one document and
I don't like it. Go ahead.
And so anyway, you may want to look at that again, consult your notes, and then we should all edit this as a group before we send something on to
What's our timing by tomorrow? So yeah, so we are starting testimony, looking at some of, we're hearing from AOE and CTE folks down the hall. So let's talk about how we want to do this so that it goes and makes sense, and that it can, education also has can weigh in.
Absolutely. I figure, we get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
It's more like teeing up the subject
Yeah.
and actually defining the details of the program or even the amount of spending. We would defer to education on how the programs get designed, implemented, who gets how much money to do it, what the best way to do it
Yeah.
are. I don't think, for instance, we mentioned community college, which is another opportunity.
So, Mr. Chair, just so that, and maybe this is a question offline or later, but maybe what you can do, the two of us can do, is just say, okay, here are the pieces that Ed is going to weigh in on. I've talked a little bit with folks, just so we're all clear.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay, yeah,
Because it's a real partnership. This is a committee that's trying to get the folks, and we down the hall are trying to talk to folks and try to help make it happen.
So it's just,
Yeah.
that I know we're up against the deadline,
Yeah.
crossover and all of that sort of stuff. This bill will go to appropriations,
Yeah,
and all of these appropriations are going to be stripped out.
yeah,
And so I think we've had some conversation about tech centers getting involved
Right.
in all of that.
Yeah.
How do we do that? But it's similar to what we did last year when appropriations all got, it ended up in the big bill.
that's right. Yeah.
So
That's a
that
good reminder.
might
Yeah,
be
yeah.
a way for us to have
Yeah.
some more time to think about particularly the appropriations pieces
Yeah.
after this.
Yeah, I'm not going to make the motion to strike this section.
John will do that.
What's that?
Jane will do that.
No, thank you, Senator Westman. You're right. We've got time and we can. Work on it.
I don't think we'll see the big bill go like first week of April, right?
Right, yeah,
So, yeah, right. So in that, I think we may want to say something about, but I think a lot of people think the tech centers ought to be in here in some fashion. I think, the idea of CCV giving,
Yeah.
all of that needs to,
be fleshed out.
and I can't see us doing that by tomorrow.
No, that's why, yeah, no question.
That's why,
No.
that's, as I was saying, I relied on the data we collected almost as a list of things to be investigated further and less for the actual dollar amounts.
Yeah.
Because the lion's share of the total of 21.4 million, 20 is already the main appropriation that we heard about from Ms. Phillips and others.
Yeah.
But then again, so that we operate with belt and suspenders, I'd like to turn to our guests and start. So thanks, Ms. Chakowski.
And so before you do that, Mr. So you're teeing this up so that what are the questions for the guests? So we'll know.
Sure. So I had asked, just as I asked Ms. Phillips, I said, of the $20 million, how much is, is it all going directly to you and then into actual on the ground practices, counseling and weatherization? Or are you only using a portion of it? Like last year, we slice it up into different things. There was a tranche of 9 million for VHFA. There was, I think, something, I'm forgetting if it was 2.5 and 2.5 million went to Efficiency Vermont to do workforce.
Right.
So I just want to understand is the disposition, what's the 24?
Yeah,
And for parties that actually got direct named funding last year, like BHFA, Efficiency Vermont, do they need to be in this bill or are they covered by the 20? And the other thing is, one last reminder, last year's appropriations were through FY23. They were 2 years. So we may have already made all the appropriations we need last year. And therefore, since we're looking at FY23's budget, there's nothing for us to do now, but we would anticipate another round of funding for them in FY24. But I just want us to be able to, dot the i's, cross the t's, and rationalize this before we ship it to approach.
yeah, thank you.
Well, I think,
Thank you for that.
I think you may want to ship something over, but as we did last year, I think we worked a long time after we sent the bill over. And we had a very different product that got plopped in the appropriations bill in the end. But I think, just from as long as appropriations listens to this committee, I think it's good to have the guidance with the money in one spot.
The money's been set aside and we're recommending some of it be released during.
Like to Mr. Kowski's point about, I don't know if it's ARPA funds or not, but the 20 million. I'm guessing it may well be, but I don't know. And whether we label it one way or the other, we know that approach will sort it out. Okay. So thank you again.
Or Senate.
Or Senate Ed, that's right. Probes or Senate Ed. With that, I'd like to turn to Mr. Lunderville, who's been patiently waiting in the wings. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Doing well, thank you. Nice to be back with your committee.
Yeah, it's turning out to be better than I think we imagined, to sit down in a room and work in person with each other together. So it's hard to know what you're missing. It's been 2 years.
It has been. We look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us today. I know you had to move some things around in your schedule to visit with us, so I really appreciate that. So you've seen the broad outlines of what we have, and I think we're just trying to do some due diligence on checking in to make sure we're not overlooking things that should explicitly be called out and funded in this year's weatherization bill. So as you've been working with a group that's looking at a lot of all these pieces, I thought it'd be helpful for us to check in with you as well.
Well, thank you. I'll offer maybe just a few thoughts and then leave it open for your questions. For the record, I'm Neil Lunderville. I'm the president and CEO of VGS, Vermont Gas Systems, but I'm testifying today as the co-chair of the EAN Weatherization at Scale Network Action Team. We have been as I think the committee knows, we've been a team, a coalition that's been building around getting more support for weatherization. And we are, sort of one part like working group where we're actually going through proposals and trying to find new and novel ways to approach weatherization. Another part of our work is certainly just general support and advocacy for increased weatherization appropriations. And then there's part of our work that's really future looking. How can we continue to make the weatherization ecosystem strong, and what are the things that we need to do that? So we cover a lot of different pieces, but the main part that we've been focused on, since our coming together in 2020, has been advancing more money toward weatherization. As the committee knows, we look back over the history of weatherization funding over the last, let's say, decade or so. It's been up and down, and that volatility in the funding levels, we think has been a real challenge. Obviously, it's a challenge when it goes up and down to meet our targets, which I think the bill that you have before you establishes in law as an additional 90,000 homes, which makes great sense. It's consistent with the Climate Action Plan recommendation, consistent with our work and thinking about what we need to do to get to the end of the decade. But the money hasn't always been there. Now, last year, this committee and the legislature and the administration made a great first step by making a big investment, a big new investment in weatherization, and also put money into new and innovative ways to fund and finance weatherization in the long term. In particular, I'm talking about the VHFA money for the on-bill financing program, which is making great progress. This year, we had recommended to the Climate Action Plan and to the administration an additional larger appropriation using the ARPA money. We had said that there should be at least $72 million. And we were really pleased that the governor's recommend came in with $80 million, $45 million to the Weatherization Assistance Program, and $35 million to Efficiency Vermont for low and moderate income weatherization support. From our perspective at the Weatherization at Scale Network Action Team, we strongly support that appropriation recommendation. We think that is a really, it's wonderful for a lot of reasons. One, it's a lot. It would be a really significant increase in the amount of money we put toward weatherization. But really importantly is that it gives us a 4-year look into the future. One thing that we hear time and again when it comes to weatherization is that we need long-term, predictable, and ultimately growing funding supports for funding streams for weatherization. And the governors recommend, and I understand that House Appropriations Committee has also supported this. This would really do that. That $80 million is we can look, we've suddenly changed our planning horizon for weatherization. And I think for some of the things that this committee is looking at, particularly around the workforce, we've long believed that having that long-term, predictable, growing funding supply for weatherization is the best thing we can do for workforce, because it sends signals to the private market, private contractors who do most of the weatherization work. It sends signals to them that the state is serious about this, they're investing in it, and they're investing in it over a long period. And when we do that, those private contractors are able to build their teams and get those teams in place. We certainly understand, and we long understood that we're in a labor shortage overall that's affecting a lot of industries, not just the climate area. So there may be specific areas that we can make investments to help build the climate workforce. But again, the single greatest thing this committee and the legislature can do is put that long-term, predictable, and ultimately growing funding stream in place for weatherization. I want to mention one more thing, and then, Mr. Chair, I think I'll stop, is that for our workforce's perspective, along the lines of what I just said, we've been looking to submit a congressionally directed spending request for additional money with support of our contributing organizations. We hope to draw down more federal money in the future, looking sort of beyond the immediate horizon, but bringing in more federal money, in particular, looking for more flexible money. The ARPA money has some real, there's some really narrow lines in which we have to stay in with the ARPA money. And one of our concerns is that the workforce things that we may want to do with this won't be fundable by ARPA, so we need another source of funding. And maybe even some of the other things like the panel upgrades and the heat switching that we want to do. So drawing down some additional flexible federal money to allow us to approach the whole home. And that starts with the workforce, and it goes through weatherization, fuel switching, panel upgrades is something that we're looking at. But again, it comes back to putting money directly into the weatherization work for those Vermonters who need that help. And we know there's a lot of them out there. So I think I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have, and really truly appreciate the great support that this committee and the legislature has shown for weatherization. It gives us a lot to work with, and we're making real progress here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any committee questions for Mr. Lunderville?
Thank you.
Right. Well, can't get off that easy. So Have you looked at all at IIJA money yet? Is that, have you seen guidance that suggests that there may be, we talked a little bit about ARPA, we've been leading on ARPA. I'm just wondering about the Jobs Act, if you see opportunities from there, particularly on the workforce side.
It's a great question, Mr. Chair, and I have not looked at that personally. I think there are probably members of our team that have, but I can't give you a good answer on that. It's something that if we haven't looked at that, we'll dig into that and can report back to the committee. But I'm not able to provide any insight for you on that.
Okay. The other thing is we had Sarah Phillips in yesterday and she was showing, you know, the how much they're growing their program over through FY26, which is great news. But even with all that growth, I think it only delivers, if we're to be on track for the 2025 target, et cetera, it probably delivers somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of the number of weatherizations we need to complete. So what's your assessment of, is the market capable of responding to provide the other 75%, or, you know, sort of how sanguine are you about meeting these targets? Or we're trying to figure out other ways to be supportive and whether or not we're setting people up for success meeting those targets.
Yeah, maybe there are sort of two questions in there. Like, I think relative to the 90,000 target that we have by the end of the decade, the $80 million that's been discussed is a amazing down payment on it, but it doesn't get us all the way there, even in the next 4 years. But being realistic, it's still a lot of money, and it will require a ramp in the weatherization workforce to be able to achieve that. So even though it doesn't get us all the way to our targets over the next 4 years, it represents what our working group believes is a reasonable and realistic target for the weatherization workforce to be able to grow up toward those 2025 and 2026 levels. I think our work in the year ahead is to make sure that we have funding streams beyond 2026 and that we can continue the ramp of growth toward the weatherization workforce. It's not just weatherization, it's also all the aspects of climate. There's a lot of crossover there, and I'm narrowing in on weatherization because it's this bill, but I think we should think about it as the overall climate workforce. But I think that's probably the work that, you know, there's another sort of parallel work group that you may have heard from, the Climate Workforce Group. We are working in tandem with them. I know they have ideas that they're fleshing out over the summer and fall. So we'll be in a better position to talk about those in January. But that's how I would answer that question for what lies out in the next couple of years.
Sure, great. Well, thanks. We had Representative Stebbins and Mr. Giambattista in to talk about the workforce group, and they, you know, I think one of their take homes was invite us back next year, because we just got launched and we know there's a lot to do here. All right, well, that is helpful. And the clean heat standard is coming along. I think we've talked many times about how clean heat goes hand in glove with weatherization. And so depending on how that program is structured, when it stands up, what kind of revenues it delivers, it may be part of developing that long-term funding stream that goes beyond the ARPA sort of windfall that we've had.
Yeah, I think they are. I just will comment that the weatherization appropriation and the clean heat standard, weatherization at scale and the clean heat standard, have always been designed to go hand in glove, but to work together, to ride together. And ultimately, I think that the work you're doing here on weatherization will be very supportive of the work on the clean heat standard. It does remain to be seen how much clean heat standard will fund weatherization work, because of the way the clean heat standard will assess the value of certain credits.
Right.
But we know a lot of the work that is going to be done for clean heat standard, particularly around the heat switching, and by that I mean electric heat pump water heaters, cold climate heat pumps, requires good weatherization work. So we're going to have to continue this weatherization work no matter what. And but I do think the clean heat standard, as we know more about that, and as that law ultimately hopefully comes into effect, it'll be able to educate and inform the funding decisions we make around weatherization in years to come.
Well, and, yes, so, thanks so much, that's very helpful. And I could turn, if there are no more committee discussion or questions with Mr. Lunderville, go to Mr. Riley. Good morning, Mr. Riley, good to see you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. For the record, Daniel Riley, Public Affairs Director for Efficiency Vermont. And thank you very much for the opportunity to testify on this important issue. Should I just dive in, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So yesterday, I thought Sarah Phillips had a great line when she was testifying, talking about the need to build an on-ramp for a superhighway to meet our state's ambitious weatherization goals. I thought that was a great metaphor. And kind of to underscore what Neil was just saying, I really thought that the $80 million request really was that ramp. Candidly, looking at the latest draft of 284, I was a little perplexed that there was funding identified for OEO, which is for the low income weatherization, but there was not anything listed speaking to the 35 million for moderate income weatherization that was requested for Efficiency Vermont. So I'd like the opportunity just to talk a little bit about that before the committee today, and please do stop me anytime. As far as the 35 million request, Efficiency Vermont is really encouraged by the breadth of support for this measure. Governor Phil Scott included it in his recommended budget in January. I believe you've heard from TJ Poore from the department in the committee testifying before, indicating they're supportive of the request. The House Energy Committee formally expressed its support for the request on February 23rd in a letter to the House Appropriations Committee. And you sort of heard from Neil just now how it aligns with a lot of the work that the Weatherization at Scale team has done. And also importantly, it aligns with the important work that VHFA is doing with the RAP program to address the financing side of things. Of course, we strongly support the request for 45 million for OEO for low income. But here at Efficiency Vermont, we're really confident that we could make very good use of that 35 million and make significant progress towards meeting our weatherization goals. We did work closely with the department to show what we expect to be able to do with this funding. When combined with our existing funding sources, we believe that Efficiency Vermont could use this funding to weatherize approximately 6,000 more additional moderate income homes from FY23 to 26. These critical funds would be deployed alongside other existing Efficiency Vermont incentives to cover 75% of project costs, up to $5,000 for Vermonters with income up to 120% of AMI. Again, that's really the critical importance of this request, is reaching those people, those Vermonters that live in the 80 to 120% AMI zone. There's also recent precedent indicating that enhanced incentives motivate Vermonters to weatherize their homes. Simply put, we know this works. In 2020, Efficiency Vermont promoted a nearly identical offer using funding from Act 62, which led to 609 moderate income weatherization projects in 2020, which is a 118% increase from the previous year. So we are strongly supportive of this request as we have some good data to indicate it works. Regarding the language of S284, there's one other critical point I'd want to make, which is that the language of the ARPA funding that states that all funding must be obligated by 2024 and spent by 2026, that does make it difficult to do this sort of on a yearly basis, as this bill currently does, sort of taking up the request and breaking it up year by year. And that's the reason why the House Energy Committee they expressed support for one big release of this funding for FY23 through 26, knowing that 2024 and 2026 deadlines were looming. If this was to be done on a yearly basis and broken up, we would have significant concerns with our ability to obligate all of these funds by the deadline. And certainly, I think the last thing anybody would want in the state of Vermont would be for ARPA funds to be left on the table. So let me stop there and see if there's any committee questions before addressing any other points.
Okay, well, it sounds like all is well. I mean, since we're not approached, we're not taking testimony on how the 80 is allocated. I think, the 45-35, but how big are the slices that come out to each program in each of the 4 next budgets? That's, beyond our bailiwick, and anyone's can actually, since we can't obligate future legislatures to have a particular appropriation. But so really, it sounds like in the end, all we need to affirm with you is that since we're supporting the $80 million appropriation, which includes basically a 45-35 split, you're going
Correct.
to be identified in the budget as having a portion of that. And so you are basically efficiency Vermont is covered, as opposed to a year ago where we had to make specific allocations in the budget to stand up, for instance, 2.5 million for workforce. You did work through NeighborWorks in Western Vermont, et cetera. So we just want to make sure that we're not dropping the ball on anything that you need to call out and fund specifically.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate you raising the issue, and no, that's the singular importance for us.
Okay. All right. Well, then it sounds like
if I may, Mr. Chairman, on the workforce issue, I'm happy to provide an update on that now, if that is helpful.
Sure.
As a reminder, last year, this committee and the legislature appropriated $2 million for workforce development initiatives for the expansion of NeighborWorks Heat Squad program, and also for other ways to grow the weatherization workforce. We started by asking market partners through an RFI process how to best grow the workforce through ARPA dollars. We're vetting those suggestions now with Guidehouse and the administration through the review process, and do hope to have an RFP in the marketplace soon. And again, just to say, we continue to work with the department and with AOA on this. They are willing partners. They are doing everything they can. But again, I spoke in January, and here we are back in mid-March, and we have yet to receive this funding or issue this RFP. I just wanted to provide that update. Again, everyone has been a very willing partner here. We do expect there's a path forward. But I just want to sort of take the time to say that ARPA is a challenging vehicle for the weatherization workforce, right? Programs have to be pretty narrowly tailored to serve a population that was adversely affected by the pandemic, which does impose some constraints on program design and kind of requires a high burden to prove that every single person trained meets that standard. So currently we have the RFP drafted with as much clear guidance as possible. And as soon as we get the green light, we'll be ready to go.
Okay. When you say you're working with the department and agency of administration, are we talking about DPS or?
Yes, correct. DPS, sorry.
Happily these days, since energy reaches in through lots of different agencies and departments, it used to be that the department was always DPS, but as I'm saying, happily these days, it includes many more actors since we have a lot of fronts to make progress on. Okay, so thanks for letting, I'm sorry to hear that continues to be sort of hung up. Just a sort of a beginner question on this, in terms of qualified, that individuals are qualified under ARPA or eligible for ARPA. Since there's been a disproportionate impact on lower income Vermonters, COVID's had a disproportionate impact that correlates with income. Is it sufficient to say that lower income Vermonters are just as a group qualified to enter into a training program that leads into the green building trends?
It's a great question, and my answer would be, I believe so, but let me just confirm that that blanket statement is true, and I can follow up with you on that. But I believe that is the case, yes.
So any questions for Mr. Riley? All right, well, so thank you, Mr. Riley. Thank you, Mr. Leadville, for coming in. We're on the final track around the lap around the track. Want to make sure no one likes to be left out of a budget proposal. I guess we're very sensitive to that. So we wanted to check in before we sign on.
Renewal.
Yeah. All right. Thank you
Appreciate
again.
it.
All right. Have a good day.
Thank you.
So committee, we are, and I think, so Ms. Chakowski, I think we're all set as best from all the testimony we had on 284, because we acknowledge that things are in motion and will evolve, but at least we flag things and we'll send them out to approach, and we're in the ballpark, and we'll see what kind of adjustments come out of the process there, and knowing that education, for instance, is going to weigh in. All right, so with that, do you have any questions for me in terms of keeping up with making timely requests of you? As long as I'm seeing you on the screen.
Not at the moment.
Okay, all right, thanks.